Hi. For Christmas, I was given a yarn swift and a yarn winder, and I realized when I went to wind my first ball of yarn, I had no idea how they worked. So I did a search on the web, and I found a couple articles, but I really wanted to see someone doing it live, and unfortunately there were no videos, which made me decide to make one. So here you go, how to wind a ball of yarn using your swift and your winder. So yarn comes in hanks, or certain yarns. So this is a skein of yarn, and it's arrived in a hank. It comes from Germany, from Wool Mice. This is wonderful yarn, by the way. And so what I'm going to show you is how to go from a hank of yarn to a ball of yarn, or in this case, some people call this a cake because of the way it's shaped. So what you do, you take your hank, remove the label, and set the label aside because you're going to need this, and sort of undo the hank. Usually it comes apart pretty easily. Make sure you've kind of separated it out. So once it's like this, you take your swift, and what I like to do is sort of rest the skein like this, and then I slowly push up on the swift until there's a pretty good amount of tension. So once you've got it set up like this, you tighten it, and there you go. Now the next thing you want to do is you want to figure out where the person who's made the yarn has tied it, and so there's going to be one or more ties. In this case I just have one, and what that does is that keeps all the yarn together while it's in transit. So what you want to do is untie, or in this case I'm just snipping the edge of the knot. Usually what it is there's a little bit of extra yarn which has been used to tie the skein, and then there's the actual sort of beginning and end. And so what I usually do is try and figure out what's going to be the easiest way to unwind based on what yarn's coming out. Let's see what we got here. And this is important because if you start with the yarn that's meant to be sort of the end or the back, it's usually wound in such a way that you're always going to be fighting the skein. I could show you here that this end sort of pulls. See how it's pulling against? It's not coming very easily. That would be basically a pain to try and wind from that end. Whereas this one, as you can see, sort of is coming easily from the bottom. So this is the easier end to wind from. So once you've figured out which end you're going to wind from, you just thread it through the yarn guide, slip it into the top notch of your winder. You sort of get a good tension with one hand, in this case I use my left, and then you're going to wind clockwise with your right. And as you can see, you also use your hand to sort of work the yarn. I mean, some yarns are going to be easier than others. This yarn is a very fine fingering weight sock yarn, so it tends to take a little bit of guidance as you work your way through. And it's all about patience. It's about slow going. It's about knowing that there's a patience to winding yarn just like there's a patience to making your pattern or knitting your pattern. So while I'm winding, I'm doing a couple things. One, I'm keeping an eye on the skein to make sure that the yarn doesn't get caught, because that can happen. That can be kind of disastrous. As you can see, there's also that other free end that's floating down here. I'm keeping an eye on that. Sometimes I actually go in and sort of tuck it back in, because what can happen is if the yarn is hanging loose, it can get caught here, wind itself up, and that's a little bit of a disaster. You can actually break your winder and your skein. So make sure you keep an eye on that. The other thing that I do while I'm winding is every once in a while I sort of look at my ball winder and I make sure that it's winding up nicely. It's not caught down here or working its way up the little tube. And that's all just to make sure that I get a nice cake at the end. I have a nice squeaky Swift. I might have to work on that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of pull a Martha Stewart or a Julia Childs. I'm going to go ahead and fade out while I continue to wind. And then once I'm done, I will be back to show you how to finish. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. One of the ways you know that you're getting close to the end is you start to see sort of little windows through your yarn as it gets closer and closer to the end. I'm watching that loose end. This is one of those times when it can get kind of dangerous to wrap around the middle of the Swift. I've got good tension going, keeping an eye on the ball to make sure it's not wrapping around the bottom, which can sometimes happen as the cake gets bigger and bigger. I'm still guiding. It's interesting because about 3/4 of the way through when you're winding, you can really start going pretty fast as the yarn starts to loosen up. You know, that's fine. Go fast, but just be aware that, again, if you snag on something or if something happens, it can really screw everything up. So towards the end, it's really helpful to go pretty slow. So now that you're done winding, you have a nice ball or cake of yarn here on your winder. So the way I pull it off is I just push my thumbs down on the tube and kind of using my fingers, I work it up and off like so. There we go. And then in order to remember exactly what yarn you have, that's where you take the label. And you just fold it up, stick it in the middle, and here we have our balls of yarn. Thanks!